also I was young, and that's good because you're quite stupid and willing to do daft stuff. And also I didn't then have commitments of mortgage, wife, family, etc. So it's just me, the savings I'd managed to accrue through 5 years of odd jobs at university, and then just living cheap on a bike with no regard whatsoever for anything to do with money beyond seeing how far I could cycle with the money I had available.
Hi, I'm Gabby Logan, and this is the II Family Money Show. In each episode, I speak to a familiar face about the role money has played in their family life and professional success. And in this episode, I'm joined by adventurer and author Alastair Humphreys. A National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, Alastair's many outdoor escapades include cycling around the world, rowing the Atlantic, and walking across India. But he's also won acclaim for his pioneering work on the concept of cheaper, simpler, closer to home microadventures. He spends his time encouraging people to live more adventurously, but is his enterprising and often daring spirit reflected in his approach to money matters? Alastair confesses to being a bit hopeless on that front, so it helps he's married to an accountant with whom he has 2 children. His latest book, Ask an Adventurer, largely focuses on how to go about making a living from these travels and how he's managed to do so. In our interview, Alastair tells me how he funded a 4-year trip around the world with just £7,000, how he's recently become a self-confessed money geek after years of ignoring his finances, and about the time he had a pizza delivered in Alaska. You are a very interesting man, and you've obviously done some incredible things and pushed yourself in many different ways. But where I want to kind of go is right back to the beginning and find out the kind of childhood you had that made you want to do all of these things, or at least gave you the freedom mentally and emotionally to be able to do all of these things. Were you the kind of kid that was kind of camping outside when you were 7 years old and hiding in trees for days on end?
No, not really. I was lucky in that I grew up in the countryside in Yorkshire, so I had what I guess is now an old-fashioned childhood of spending a lot of time playing outside, running around the fields, playing in the river, climbing trees, that sort of stuff. But no more or less than any other kid my sort of age around there. And all through my childhood and school, I was definitely not one of the crazy adventurous kids. I was more of the weedy, nerdy kind of end of the spectrum, really. And what really changed for me was when I started discovering expedition books, travel books of crazy men and women going off around the world doing all sorts of stupid stuff. And because I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my own life, and I kind of felt this urge to prove myself and try and do something big and difficult with my life, but I wasn't very successful at sports or anything like that. So suddenly adventures and expeditions seemed like a way to go and really push myself hard, and then perhaps on the way figure out what to do when I eventually grew up. But I haven't quite worked out that last bit yet.
Well, it's turned out to be quite lucrative, and I'm not going to delve into your personal finances, but you're obviously earning enough money from your books and your podcasts and everything else you do that you can keep on doing this, which is fantastic because you've managed to kind of monetize it as well and turn it into a career. Because that's the other thing, there's an entrepreneur in you, because when you started out, it wasn't a job, was it? This was something that you wanted to prove to yourself. So how did you have the financial security to step off and go and do that? Because a lot of people, that would be the thing that would hold people back, thinking, well, I've got my mortgage, I've got my kids, or, when you first went, how much were you thinking about the finances?
Well, when I first started to do big adventures, I never had any thought that it would actually become a job. I had a vague, unrealistic, perhaps daydream that I'd love to write a book about it, but I was under no illusion that writing a travel book would make me rich. So I really just wanted to do a big adventure because I wanted to do it. And then I assumed that afterwards I would get a real job. So I decided to cycle around the world because that was something that was suitably cheap that I could afford. I was 24 when I set off, so it wasn't an expensive expedition, relatively speaking. So it was sort of doable, and I assumed I'd get a job afterwards. And to specifically answer your question, the really, really important thing is that I had the safety net behind me of I trained to be a teacher. So I knew that if everything went wrong with the journey, or even after the journey, I could come home and get a decent job. And I think quite often when people are talking about adventures and expeditions, there's a temptation to say, go and live your dreams, do this stuff, it's brilliant. Anyone can do what I did. But I think it's really important that I acknowledge that I did have that safety net of a decent education, meaning that when I got home, I'd be able to pay the bills somehow. Also, I was young, and that's good because you're quite stupid and willing to do daft stuff. And also, I didn't then have commitments of mortgage, wife, family, etc. So it's just me, the savings I'd managed to accrue through 5 years of odd jobs at university, and then just living cheap on a bike with no regard whatsoever for anything to do with money beyond seeing how far I could cycle with the money I had available.
And tell us how many days it took in the end, that first challenge?
Well, it took me 4 years and 3 months to cycle around the world. I rode through 60 countries and 5 continents. 4 years on the road, and the whole thing cost me less than £7,000. So, which is doable if you're willing to pay all your transport costs by just pedalling around the world, crossing the oceans on boats rather than aeroplanes, and then being willing to live like a hobo, just sleeping wild and eating banana sandwiches and instant noodles for 4 years. So yeah, £7,000 I now see as a spectacularly good investment of my total life savings at the time.
That is it's an incredible amount of time, and it's a very, very small amount of money to fund that, to spend that amount of time on the road, and that freedom that you must have had as well to kind of, every day you're just living your best life, aren't you? Going where you want to go, doing what you want to do. Was there a point where you thought, I'm not sure I could ever see myself fitting back into normal, in inverted commas, society?
Well, I think I'm still feeling that in some ways. I mean, I see that it was a incredible experience and a real privilege, but I also see it as a bit of a curse, really. I mean, all the years, it's quite a lot of years now since I finished that first expedition, and I've struggled a bit with accepting real life after those days, for sure. So, but I think it was a worthwhile trade-off.
And when you were away and you're experiencing all these different cultures, and you're doing, kind of things you've never done before, you might never see these places again, knowing that you're going to write about it when you get back or while you're on the road, how does that process work? Because you'd never written a travel book before.
No, I'd never written anything before. I thought English was boring at school, so I quit after GCSE. So I wrote a diary every day, partly because I wanted to write a book, partly though because I was on my own around the world and I had no friends. So it's this sort of cathartic thing to do, and it was something to do. And I wrote a blog. So this was a decision I wanted to try and share my journey. So I wrote a blog about it, and I was doodling away in my diaries, knowing that when I came home I wanted to write. And I really wanted to write just as a personal challenge, again, not because I actually thought that would be a viable job.
And going back even before this, so you've trained to be a teacher, so that's a good solid career you can come back to, which is a great kind of safety net, as you say, in the back of your mind. Before that, let's go back to your family, kind of your upbringing in terms of where money featured there, because it strikes me you're not somebody that was always focused on money as being the end game. You wanted to be a teacher, you want to do adventure. So what was the family kind of financial situation growing up? Did you feel very secure? Was money ever an issue?
I personally have never had any interest in money until really very recently. I'm still actually quite amused to be on this podcast, but I suppose it's a different perspective. I grew up, I had a very lovely family life. My mum and dad worked really hard. They were really and are still really obsessed with working hard, saving money. It's a good old-fashioned Yorkshire, Lancashire values of just save. So we were really conscious that money was there to be saved more than to be spent. And that was really drummed into us. So don't waste your money, don't waste money. But we had money wasn't an issue in my childhood. We weren't driving Ferraris, but it was certainly not an issue. It was, I suppose, a regular focus just because my parents were really keen on hard work and saving, though.
So would you say they were frugal?
I certainly would say they were frugal, yeah, and they would see that as a very, very good compliment, and in no way an insult. So yeah, and that has passed on to me. I've been always quite frugal, and then spending 4 years when I only had £7,000 to spend made me so conscious of money. Now I could either buy a bottle of champagne or I could keep cycling for 2 more months, where, those sort of decisions are crazy. I went 4 years never buying chocolate, never buying beer, because I was just focused on save the money and you can get through this journey. So I suppose, yeah, the frugality certainly helped extend my journey. And I've gone on to do, so when I came home, I then started doing other expeditions, and I still didn't have much cash, but I was really always conscious that you can either live cheap and travel for a long time or do it the other way around. So, for example, I walked across southern India. I followed a holy river right the way through southern India. I went from coast to coast, 6 weeks of hiking through India, and that whole journey cost me £500, including the airfare. So once you're willing to sleep outdoors and travel yourself, then suddenly adventure does become accessible without needing loads of money as you would for going up Mount Everest or to the North Pole. So there are different ways of having expedition and adventure and travel experiences without having to lay out loads of cash.
Oh gosh, Alastair, there's so much to unpick there and ask you that has just, made my mind kind of blow a little bit. How you're doing it on those kind of budgets, and eating well and not being ill. I mean,
well,
say
not
you
eating
become
well is
sick
part
somewhere.
of it. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, eating enough to not become ill, though. You had to keep your energy levels up, so you had to get some nutrition from somewhere. First of all, obviously the choice between champagne and 2 months of travel, I can see which one you're going to choose. Did anybody ever give you a beer? Did anybody ever just say, oh, wow, what you're doing is amazing, and give you a treat on the way? Did you get that bar of chocolate from somebody? I would have given you it if I'd bumped into you, for sure.
Oh, definitely. I mean, people often say with travelling, the kindness of strangers was an extraordinary thing. And that holds true in rich parts of the world, and probably more so actually in poor parts of the world. The generosity and kindness of people was incredible. And I had to really wrestle with trying to be taking the kindness, but without feeling I'm just taking, and trying to give back, I suppose, in terms of interesting conversations. But yeah, so to cut it short, people were very kind to me. One example, cycling through Alaska, a car went on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere. A car went past me on a gravel road, cloud of dust. A couple of hours later, they zoomed past me the other way. I didn't think anything of it at the time until they slammed on the brakes, and the lady wound down her window, and on the passenger seat she had a big stack of takeaway pizzas. She'd had to drive a couple of hours to get takeaway up there, and she handed me a pizza. She said, I think my family have got enough here. Have a takeaway pizza. And she drove off and just left me literally in the dust in the middle of Alaska holding this takeaway pizza, and I just burst into tears. I mean, that's kindness, and that is really how to enjoy a pizza as well.
Oh, absolutely. It must have tasted divine. Yes. And when people do things like that as well, I guess it also restores, and all of our faith in human nature at times in the last, certainly this year is being tested, isn't it? And what we're seeing obviously around the world at the moment. So do you kind of on those trips every day, are you reminded about the goodness in humanity? Are you seeing things all the time that just kind of restore your faith?
Yeah, absolutely. And the news is showing us now the not so good side of human aspects of human nature. Before I started cycling around the world, I was worried about the dangerous parts of the world. And you read the press, and some parts of the world seem dangerous. But my experiences of cycling through these so-called dangerous countries and different cultures, different religions, poor places, was just incredible generosity and kindness. I've cycled through quite a lot of countries that have featured in wars on TV, and I just think of the incredibly lovely, kind, decent people that I met every single day. And my fears from before the adventure were about the dangers of humans out in the world. But once you actually start traveling slowly and simply in remote parts of the world, those sort of fears generally dissipate. You have to be careful, of course, and there are a few idiots everywhere. Yeah. But by and large, I just was overwhelmed by the kindness of people out in the world.
So if people turned out to be okay, what were the biggest dangers to your well-being on your travels?
Well, I suppose it depends on the trip. So cycling around the world, the biggest danger was idiots sitting in a ton of metal, hammering along at 70 miles an hour and paying no attention to the cars that they were driving. So yeah, I mean that's there's a difference
an
on
obvious thing. Yeah.
on expeditions. There's a difference between perceived risk and actual danger. You know, the things that you are in control of. So, for example, if you're rowing across an ocean, you need to keep yourself clipped onto the boat with a safety lead at all times. If you do that, you're not going to drown. Versus the things that are out of your control, like idiots driving cars, and that's just down to luck, sadly.
When you rowed, it was the Atlantic, wasn't it? You rowed. You were in a team there, weren't you? You didn't row that solo. And obviously, some of your expeditions have been very much on your own. 4 years cycling around the world. You went to Spain and followed. Was it a route you were following with Ernest Hemingway, or was it?
Yeah. So
was it just your own kind of?
No, so in Spain, I was following the route of a book by Laurie Lee, a guy you might have read. You might have read Side with Rosie at school.
Yeah.
His sequel, he walked through Spain playing his violin, and that was one of the books that really inspired me on to travel simply, and to be a writer. And he played the violin walking through Spain, and I'd always dreamt of doing that, but I can't play the violin. I have zero musical talent. But a few years ago, I decided to just need to toughen up and dare myself to do it. So, relevant to money, I suppose, I turned up in Spain with no money, no credit card, only my violin, which I'd been learning for 7 months, and I just had to stand there with the open violin case and busk.
So just at this moment, Alastair, would you say grade 1, 2 level of violin? Was it that kind of we're talking, or maybe?
I turned up in Spain. I played for a whole month. I came home. I kept practicing for about another month. And then I did my grade 1 exam. I turned up at the place, and the invigilators were all, "Where is your small child?" I was like, "Nope, I'm doing the exam." So I was worse than grade 1. I had no money. And again, I just had to play. And it's about being willing to be vulnerable, putting yourself on the line to look like a total fool, and to trust, again, in the decency of people. But I lived in a month, I earned 120 euros as I walked 500 miles through Spain. And no man needs 120 euros in a month. I lived like an absolute king. It was a wonderful experience.
120. So where do you sleep then on these kinds of trips?
Key to pretty much all of these financial planning things is that you sleep outside, and you wash by jumping into rivers, and you eat whatever's cheap in the market that day. So that's generally my premise. But those things, I guess, for some people would sound like hardships, but I love sleeping outdoors and jumping in rivers. And once you've walked for 20 miles, then a loaf of bread and 2 bananas taste absolutely delicious. So that side of things I quite enjoy. And for me, the adventure on that experience was about daring myself to get out of my comfort zone and play the violin extremely badly.
That's what I like about your expeditions and your adventures, that you aren't necessarily doing something, it's not about climbing Everest or, doing something that actually lots of people are doing. You're doing things that put you in an uncomfortable position in different ways. And obviously they take you away from home as well. And now you are married and you have children. Does that change the danger levels that you're willing to put yourself kind of in front of, or does it change the amount of time that you want to spend away from home?
Yeah, it's very much changed both of those things. Before I was married and had kids, I was pretty cavalier with stuff. I didn't want to die because I really loved being alive, but I was pretty relaxed about the whole thing, and up for the sort of glory things of going down in a blaze of glory, or he died doing what he loved. I used to love that sort of stuff, but now I feel very differently. My life has a responsibility to others. So really, and also I now no longer want to be away for years or months on end. So that's completely changed my adventuring. I've been in recent years doing something which I started to call microadventures, which was my attempt to try and find all the stuff I loved about wilderness and solitude and adventure and nature. All that big stuff, could I find that in short, local, simple, cheap, close to home, achievable micro adventures that I, and therefore anyone else, could do in a weekend or just overnight after work. So my big adventure days have really moved on to micro adventures now.
And I heard you talking about the challenge of becoming a father and how that was really difficult for you to kind of work out, how you were going to do these adventures and keep the essence of you. which I think a lot of people will recognise that as being inherent with that new experience. Whether you're working in a bank or you're wandering around the world for a few years, it's what makes you tick, isn't it? And so especially when you're doing the kind of job that you do. Do you call it a job still? Let's say
I think I call it a job with a little...
It seems weird calling it a job.
Yeah, I call it a job with a little quote marks up in the air, I think.
Yeah, and I really love that honesty, because I think that would have really resonated actually with a lot of new fathers and mothers, what you said.
Yeah, so I found it really hard becoming a parent. I loved it, of course, but I found it very hard trying to, one, go away and do these big adventures because I loved them, and it was very much part of my identity, but also it had by that point had become my full-time job. It was my sole source of income, was the stuff that I did from these adventures, and to not be able to do that fully, I really struggled with the loss of identity of myself as a just me, a guy, but also me, my work. I thought my work was going to plummet, and yeah, I really struggled with those sort of things. And I was also at the same time, by trying to essentially, I'd earn my living by showing off about myself on the internet and telling stories and writing books and things. And I had this online life as well as my home life. And so trying to juggle all these things in a new direction, I didn't deal with very well. And if I could go back in time, essentially when I was in my early 20s and dreaming of adventure, I read books by crazy people like Ranulph Fiennes, and I really I defined the rules of my life from reading these sort of crazy books of this is the life I want to live, and I just went at it full pelt, and I loved doing all of that, but I didn't allow any flexibility into it. I didn't allow myself to say, oh, I'm now 30, oh, I'm now 40, oh, I've now got kids, how is my life going to evolve? And the Spain trip was a really big process for that, in terms of me asking myself, what does adventure mean now? Is adventure sleeping outside and walking hundreds of miles? No, it isn't, because I've been doing that for 20 years. That's easy for me. The adventure, therefore, now is do something different, dare yourself to play the violin, and try and get your curiosity and excitement from life in that sort of way. And then can I get these sort of things even smaller and locally close to home by doing microadventures? So yeah, gradually and belatedly allowed myself to evolve. Thank goodness.
It is, I think, there is a luxury, though, I think, in being a man when it comes to this profession. Because whenever I've heard Ranulph Fiennes talk, my practical side is going, but where were your kids and your family? You mean you're away from your wife for a year, you know? So those, I think it is skewed, I think, towards men, because women are just so practical about how you kind of look after the family. So let's talk about your wife, because she must have you must have struck a deal, did you, at the beginning, and say, look, this is who I am, and I'm going to continue to do this. You know, how does she feel about the continuing adventures of Alastair Humphreys?
Well, probably like a lot of would-be parents, we didn't have all of these sensible discussions that would have been sensible to have had in advance of this bundle of chaos arriving in our lives. So it's a slightly dishevelled and disorientated and exhausted series of figuring things out, which all parents will be familiar with. So for a while, I tried to just crack on with my life as normal, and to just go and do stuff in the chunks when my wife was at home for maternity leave, for example. And of course, that was exhausting for her and not ideal for me either, going away. And it was just all quite stressful and more argumentative than I would have liked. So I've then changed, really. I stopped doing the big adventures. I've become much more now the stay-at-home dad, and yeah, it's just not possible to both be a stay-at-home caring dad and to be a go off into the world gung-ho explorer. And I have absolutely no doubt that the sort of questions that women like Alison Hargreaves, the climber, get grilled for leaving their kids at home in a way that dads don't. But I am now hopefully trying to redress the balance. I'm now the chief stay-at-home dad. I've got my eye on the clock now because I've got to go pick up the kids after our chat here, and my wife still works full time with a very sensible and normal job as an accountant.
Yeah, tell us what she does, because I do think, yeah, she's an accountant, which I think is ironic, actually.
Yeah. Well,
that's such a steady, sensible job.
We met and got together long before I considered myself an adventurer and long before she considered herself an accountant, when we both just considered ourselves carefree and happy students. And then it's fun, the very different directions life have gone. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that if we met today, we would have very little to talk about. But marriage is a funny old thing and we get along very well.
That's just as well. But I think that's brilliant, actually, that you did start almost before all of this, because she saw you evolving, you saw her evolving, and she knows what makes you tick. But I'm wondering if she enjoys going on holiday for £3 a day. How do family holidays work?
Family holidays work like normal family holidays should. I definitely don't recommend my tips and tricks for living cheap for a nice family holiday. So no, I very much separate my adventure life from my real life and holidays.
And she is an accountant, so am I jumping to the gun in assuming that she looks after the family finances?
Well, she did for a long time. So for a long time, whenever I had any spare money from my work, I would just give it all to her and she would pay off some of our mortgage. Or at least I think she paid off our mortgage. And that was all I would do. I'd just give her the money. So, and I had zero interest. And I also, I pretty much took a willful, childish disdain of anything to do with money. I've always been quite frugal. I don't spend much, but whenever I had any spares, I had no interest in anything. So for a long time she did. I've finally had a bit of an epiphany, but she's definitely the brains of the operation. And the looks as well. So
does she decide... You decide together then if you're going to pay off some mortgage or if you're going to invest in something? Would that be a collaboration between the two of you?
We actually work fairly separately, really, in that I have my business and I earn the money that I manage to make and I do what I want with it, and she has her job and does what she wants to do with her money, and then between us we pay the bills along the way. But no, we're very happily together, but fairly independent within those. And in terms of the things we do with our money, we just make our own choices with it, and each are quite happy for the others each to do whatever they want to do.
And that's quite, from my experience, that's quite unusual. To be that independent of each other in a family. Yeah. So if you were to say be investing in, say, an ISA or something like that, would you do that? Just go on and do it yourself?
So when I tell my wife I've been on this podcast later, she will kill herself laughing. So until really quite recently, as I said, I just gave her all my money and she paid off some mortgage and I'm guessing did an ISA or stuff like that. I'm not too sure. Then a few years ago, I did a talk for a financial planning company, and everyone in the audience was horrified that I didn't have a pension, and they sort of shamed me into it. So I signed up for a company and got a pension. And then this nice man would come and tell me what to do once a year, luckily with my wife sitting next to me, and she would answer all his questions and I would make him tea and then completely glaze over. And I had no interest or no knowledge, which is really good for the Family Money Show. But recently, we're about 6 months...
No, but this is brilliant, Alastair, because I think that a lot of people will totally relate to that, especially the kind of glazing over the eyes going, well, yeah, if you say it works.
So I knew that money was important, and I think especially with my career as an adventurer, it's kind of a young man's game. So I'm aware that I need to squirrel away some money for later in my life. I'm aware of that. I just find it incredibly boring. But then about 6 months ago, I was out for lunch with a friend of mine and I was doing one of my childish rants about how boring money is. And she said to me, "You're being a complete idiot. You're a perfectly intelligent guy. It's really not very complicated. Read these few books and come back to me." So I've become a bit of a money geek within only the last 6 months. So perhaps that might be interesting for your show, to go from a total Luddite to a new, but admittedly naive enthusiast. And my wife looks at me with a sort of endearing, slightly patronising look on her face after she's been an accountant for 20 odd years, and I'm suddenly newly enthusiastic.
So tell me, in these last 6 months then, what have you learned that's amazed you the most or has given you kind of food for thought? Oh, he's rubbing his hands together now.
I'm excited now because finally I can unleash my massive expertise after reading about 10 books. So what I've really learned is, in a nutshell, I really, really wish I'd started saving many, many years ago. I've learnt what compound interest is, and I've got really addicted to compound interest calculators on the internet, which just blow your mind about how much your money grows if you save it early. There's also an amazing website called the Latte Factor, which you put in, if you buy a latte every day, it tells you how much that would have made by the time you were 60 if you saved it away. And that also blows my mind. I've realized that some of these investment companies, the fees, they're only whatever percentage fees, actually kills you over time, and that really none of this is very hard at all. And now I just I've taken it all back and I do everything myself. I've spent a few months very much enthusiastically reading various books, including there's a movement in America called FIRE, Financial Independence, Retire Early, of whom one of the main protagonists has the ridiculous sounding name of Mr. Money Mustache, but he's a very helpful guy. And if you Google, he's got a blog post called The Simple Maths Behind Early Retirement. And reading this blog post just blew my mind. From hating money to finding it boring to finding it incredibly complicated, I now find it really quite interesting, but also really refreshingly simple, which is nice. I feel good that I finally got there.
You said it's not an old man's game. Ranulph Fiennes might beg to differ, I guess, on that front. I mean, he's kept it going for a bit of a time, hasn't he? So, but you maybe have to adapt what you do, and you're doing that. You're diversifying in terms of podcasts, and obviously your books have a different age ranges. It's a very exciting time, actually, to be able to kind of do those things, because there's so many options now, aren't there, in the way you publish and the way you broadcast. What gives you the most joy?
What I really love about the working side of my life is the freedom I have, and particularly the creative freedom, to be able to, these days, essentially to be my own publishing company, my own, with the books that I just publish myself rather than doing them through publishing companies, because it's much quicker, it's much easier, it's much freer, and you get much better royalties. I can be my own broadcasting company, running my little podcast. I make my own film company, I can make my own films. And I do talks, and all of these things have a trickle effect of together bringing in enough money to pay the bills. And I absolutely love that side of things. If I didn't love all of that and I only loved adventure, I'd be much better off being a teacher and just using my 2 months of summer holidays to go on massive big adventures. But I actually really enjoy the creative, free, independent business side of what I do as well.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant, isn't it? That, especially if you are nipping off to pick up the kids soon from school. You can do those things at different times of the day, as well as planning your next adventure, no doubt. And you've really got, as you say, to micro adventures. So what's next? What's coming up for you?
Well, having started my adventures huge, they seem to just be getting increasingly small as more and more I'm just realizing that micro adventures to me don't feel like a compromise. I'm seeing the potential of so much good stuff from having short, local, environmentally friendly adventures. So much so that I've spent the last year exploring the single Ordnance Survey map that I live on. Those big fold out hiking maps you get, they're about 15 miles across. And I decided to spend a whole year just on this one map that I live on. And I was quite worried, having spent a lot of time in a lot of countries, that I'd find this very boring. But I've just become fascinated by how many footpaths right on my doorstep I've never hiked or run down in my life. And I'm loving it. So I'm currently exploring the single map that I live on and writing a book about that. And that's going to keep me busy for a while.
And so where are you in that now? How many...
Well, I've spent a year now. My plan was to do one grid square in real depth once a week. So I'd go to a random grid square on the map and spend several hours there walking down all the footpaths, taking photographs, writing, just really, really trying to pay attention to where I lived. And I'm now in the writing phase of that.
Are you quite disciplined with your writing?
Oh,
Do you say it's 3 hours, that's it? Or
I think you have to be. I don't really like writing. I like having written. It's a bit like exercise. You sort of dread it, and then afterwards you're glad you've done it. So I can only write through discipline. So I come to my shed in the morning, and at 9 o'clock I have to write 1,000 words. That's my challenge to myself. And some days you can bosh that out in no time. Sometimes it's an agony. Some days there's a podcast scheduled in my calendar, which is brilliant because it means I can have a nice chat for an hour rather than actually doing any work. But I find it quite hard to write, but I like having written afterwards.
how did the pandemic, obviously it would have affected your adventures because everybody's adventures were curtailed. And at the beginning when we could have an hour outside, well, that's nothing for a man like you, Alastair. So was that I suppose it would be mentally, it would affect everybody in different ways. But with the kind of thing that you do, how did you even get your head round how you were going to make a living or what you were going to do in life if this was going to go on indefinitely?
Well, I absolutely hated the entire experience. Homeschool and Joe Wicks pretty much killed me. I did all the homeschooling and the Joe Wicks. I was often the only person in our family doing Joe Wicks when the rest of my family had refused. It was awful.
Eating Cocoa Pops on the sofa watching you.
Exactly. But equally, there's the crucial disclaimer that my wife was busy in her full-time job earning money. We've got a garden. My kids are fine in school. Life was better than 99% of the world. And I was continually reminding myself that as I went out to do my hours evening exercise. And what got me the idea of exploring my map was that time when we were only allowed out for an hour. I set myself a mission to try and run every single street where I live, and then map it on Strava like a geek. And I realized that really close to my home, within my running distance, there were streets I'd never been down. And I call myself an explorer and think of myself as a curious person. And here on my doorstep were things I'd never seen before. So I was really just tried to make myself see the opportunities for adventure rather than getting frustrated by all the constraints that were put on us.
Did you start kind of daydreaming, though, about massive adventures, thinking, oh, I haven't done this one yet, I haven't done that one yet, I wonder if I'll ever get a chance to do this? Or did you invent something else to do once this is all over?
Well, I think it really changed my perspective on adventure. I mean, for quite a few years, I've been getting increasingly concerned about the connection between climate change and travel. We love traveling, but with those of us who travel, we trash the world we love by doing it. And I've been becoming increasingly uneasy about that. And suddenly not being able to travel and just forced me to just move on my thinking a little bit and just think, well, I don't need to. I can find adventure close to home. And importantly, in terms of the work I do, I don't think I need now to be saying to people, you should definitely go to the North Pole. You should go and climb Everest, when actually that's just encouraging a problem. And I think really my adventuring and my work now needs to be about encouraging people to find nature close to home, to immerse themselves in it, to care for it, and to get all the benefits from it without doing any damage. So yeah, it's really changed my approach to adventure, and I'm not quite sure what happens from here.
Alastair, I guess there's going to be some people listening who think, well, it's all right you saying that because you've done the cycle round the world, and you've done these really exciting trips through, countries that people can never even dream of. So I guess there's going to be a young person maybe listening who thinks, well, I still want to do those things. And it is a dilemma, isn't it? Because we know that travel is one of the biggest contributors to the changing the planet's, kind of negative effects of travel that happen on the planet.
Yeah, I'm very, very conscious. I've now eaten all of my cake and I'm now telling everyone else they can't have any cake. But what I would say is that if you want to go on a really big adventure, then go and do it. And if that involves flying somewhere, then go and do it. Just spend a big chunk of time there. What we don't need to do is fly to Prague for a stag weekend. That's a ridiculous use of flights. Yeah. What we don't need to do is fly to somewhere to go and give a talk when we can do it via Zoom, or even just say no to the talk. I'm not going to fly to talk. So I think it's not putting flight shame onto people. It's just getting people to think about it. And then, best option of all, get on your bicycle outside your front door, pedal off, keep going, for 4 years, and eventually you'll get all the way back to your front door without using an aeroplane. So there's plenty of ways of having adventure without trashing the planet.
Yeah, although somebody setting off now without wanting to be, a party pooper is going to find the world slightly different, and there are still countries where they won't be very welcome will they with COVID. So you were lucky, weren't you, to do the timing of what you did?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the thinking of what I've done now, when I used to just turn up in villages and sleep on people's floors or knock on someone's door and they'd invite me in for dinner. I look back on all of that with incredible gratitude.
What do your children think about their dad's job?
They think I'm a bit of a boring loser. Don't like most kids, I think. They what they do like is that I'm now here to pick them up from school every day. They like that. I think they find it. They really have not very much interest, is my honest answer.
But does that, do you think your kind of ability to not, to do something you really wanted to do, to pursue a dream, to not be driven, to choose a profession because of what you were going to be paid for it, do you think you've managed to kind of pass that on, though, in any small way to them, even though they're maybe not that interested in the actual journeys? Yeah,
I hope so. I think I really don't care whether they become adventurers or not, but I really deeply care that they choose their job, and they're lucky, they're bright kids, they'll do fine at school, and that then means they can choose. They don't need to just follow the route that everyone in their class is doing or what so and so thinks they should be doing. They really have a choice, which is such a privilege. And nowadays there's so many jobs. Most of the jobs that will be available for them probably haven't been invented yet by the time that the things they'll be doing when they reach the working market. So there's so much opportunity. So what I just try and encourage them is to be really broad-minded about what they do and to choose something that they really enjoy and that's hopefully useful for the world. And then my new addition will be start a pension and an ISA the moment you get your first job and watch that compound interest rack up. That's the new addition to my boring dad speech.
Yeah, and your wife going, what? Who is this man?
Yes, exactly.
Where's he come from?
Yeah.
It's funny, when you were saying then about saying to your kids, I don't care whether you become an adventurer, but do what you want to do. It's ironic that their mum is an accountant. It's like adventurer or an accountant. It's that that kind of steady job, or a job that feels almost like being an actress. You don't know where it's going to lead you. So they've got two great role models, I think, in that respect at home, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely. Because I'm really conscious to not try and say that being an adventurer is a good thing to do and getting an office job is a bad thing to do, because that's complete nonsense. My wife really enjoys her job. She really likes it. She loves going to an office and having that friendship with people there. She loves testing her brain. And then she also just enjoys the security of getting paid a set amount every month, whereas I only get paid when someone emails me and books me for a talk or someone happens to buy my book. So there's the security side of things. So that in no way is one better than the other, but they're just quite different. No. But they are both conscious choices.
And while your children right now might not be showing masses and masses of interest, I'm sure the schools that they go to are always asking you and other schools to go in and talk to the kids, are they?
Yeah, when I got back from cycling, actually, whilst I was cycling around the world, I gave about 300 talks in schools along the way to take my bike into assemblies, all dirty.
Anything
weirdo.
For a free biscuit, Alastair.
Well, exactly, yes. Yeah, free school dinner, and then I'd cycle off again. And then afterwards, the way that I started to turn adventure into a viable job was just by doing loads and loads of school talks. So for years, that was the majority of my income, was just doing talks in schools, and then gradually writing books in around it. So yeah, I've spent a lot of time giving a lot of talks in a lot of schools, which has been brilliant.
And what can you think of any for me, the best questions or a best question that you've been asked by a school kid that I've omitted to ask you today?
Well, you haven't asked me anything to do with where I go to the toilet, which is usually the first sorts of questions.
I knew you were going to say that.
But did you?
I nearly said, I bet it's scatological.
Yeah, well, yeah. The little, be careful when you're picking which kid to ask. Don't choose the sweet little girl with pigtails who's going to ask something like that. But what I really enjoy about talking about adventures is that there's quite quite often teachers tell me afterwards that some of the kids who are really engaged and really enthused and really asking questions are the ones who often aren't doing that well in school. They're not doing that well academically. And I think then that if you can encourage them to have broader interests, that's a good aspect of it. And I think the good schools are ones that do that, whether it's sport or extracurricular stuff or, who knows, adventure, travel, just trying to broaden people's minds a little bit.
Yeah, they might not go off and cycle around the world, but they might do something else that's outside of their comfort zone that could benefit the rest of mankind. You don't know. So well done you for touching so many young lives and I'm sure inspiring kids to think differently and think outside the box, which is certainly what you've done. Thank you for your time today, Alastair. I'm really delighted to hear that you've become a real aficionado and a very passionate kind of personal money expert in the last 6 months. Good timing for this podcast. Yeah. I look forward to that next book about compound interest.
yeah, I'm not sure for that. But yeah, thank you very much, Gabby. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you have time, please like and follow the II Family Money Show and leave us a review or rating in your podcast app. You can find loads of ideas on how to plan for you and your family's financial future at ii.co.uk. I'll see you next time.